Well, good morning. Welcome. This is kind of exciting for me to be up here and introduce, people who I have a lot of respect for, guys that I've come to work with. One guy who I hired. The topic today, is a little bit about Vireo and how we've kind of come about, and we're going to talk about some of our trends, what we see, some of the happenings in the marketplace over the last year. And on the stage, Chris Jeffries, he's the founder of Wholesome Co., who's our partner in Utah. And Chris and I met about 2.5, 3 years ago through a mutual friend. And really just kind of peer to peer, we met and kind of started talking about the industry and the outlook. And, Chris ran his business through a whole tech platform. And he's exited a business, a company called Order Up. And at one point at the peak, we're doing 25, 30,000 deliveries a day. And they started a tech business and we seeded it. And I joined the company and board. And what a great partner he's become. He's got a wealth of knowledge and something that we're capturing within the, Vireo umbrella. Cory, I met about 3 weeks before Vireo announced the acquisition of Eaze. And not only is he handsome, but he's fun. He's a great leader. And he's just been a tremendous partner of ours. And we've quickly become friends. And he's got a great history and story to tell. And Cardell, he runs retail for Proper in Missouri. And as a founder of Proper, I really have two partners who have reported to me, and HR reports to me. He's one of two people who I've hired. And he's become what I say is like a little brother by age, but he is incredibly smart. He's been a tremendous asset to the Proper team, now the Vireo team, and somebody who I just continue to learn from. So these are my guys, and this is the team today. So there's my intro. These guys. I'm going to start out with Chris. He's exited businesses before, and he has led many organizations. Chris, will you talk about what's different about this acquisition and partnership, and from your perspective? And I think that would be a good way to introduce the topic.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, JP. So I go back to Order Up was in the kind of the height of the food delivery wars. You guys all probably ordered free food from 2010 to 2015. Uber Eats and DoorDash basically won the market over, but we were acquired. Order Up was acquired. We were backed by Steve Case, grew it to about 20,000 orders a day, 100 million GMV, and we were acquired by Groupon right here in Chicago. And they're trying to reinvent their business model, and we are basically the toolkit, if you will, to reinvent the restaurant vertical. One of the problems with that acquisition, why it didn't work, was a very top-down approach. So as soon as we came in there, they said, despite not, saying that they wouldn't do this, they decided to rebrand to Groupon to Go. And I was like, man, let me look at the customer base. The average customers were buying $10 bed sheets in the morning at a discount. That's not the customer that's paying $15 for delivery food at night. And so that was, problem number one. Problem number two is that the same sales reps that were selling the restaurants and put some restaurants out of business with the Groupon deals were then tasked with selling this thing called Groupon to Go. So ultimately that failed. And the difference between that acquisition and what I saw with Maz and team as they came in was it was more of a what we call house of local operators. Let the local operators who are closest to the customers do what they do best. And that's what has allowed us to win in Utah, or winning in Utah, is that we just know all the ins and outs of how customers buy, how we retain them, how we grow that customer base in Utah. I don't pretend to know how JP does it in Missouri. And so that was the thesis around the model that was complete. It was a 180 from the Groupon acquisition. So hopefully that helped.
Yeah, and thanks, Chris. So the bottom-up approach, what we've deemed the house of local operators, and culture and people are always instrumental in any organization. And I think at the core of this, we started out and said, hey, how are we going to run a business with a lot of different people from all across the country, and making sure we kind of hold on to that culture of people and leadership. And Cory, you've been through fast and high growth. You founded a business that went public in California. You managed through complexities of partnerships to eventually taking over Eaze. Can you talk about kind of a little bit of your background and what's been different and what you're excited about with this acquisition?
Yeah, absolutely. So I became the CEO of Eaze in 2022 and joined the company in 2020. Eaze has both the legacy delivery business in California. We also acquired Green Dragon, which was 17 retail stores in Colorado. And then we had a de novo license in Florida that we grew to now 41 stores. And each of those markets are sort of very different, and the sort of feel of those markets is very different. It gets back to the fact that you really do have to know each market very in depth. And within the Vireo structure, I think one of the things that JP touched on was how Chris and JP knew each other before they joined Vireo. Likewise, I've been friends with Tyson, our CFO, for the past 7 years. And so I was very familiar with the organization. I'd had the Deep Roots team out to our Florida facility. So there's a lot of just sort of organizational history. And as all these businesses are coming together, it may seem sort of chaotic from the outside, but the reality is a lot of these operators have been very, very good, very, very knowledgeable about their individual state. And because of the nature of cannabis, that's really what's most important, is how well do you know your market? Because at the end of the day, our sort of corporate structure is very focused on kind of capital allocation and bringing new deals. But the operations are very centered around the local operators. And so for us, what was interesting is we had 3 markets, and we've sort of been on both sides of the Vireo transition. We had a fantastic operator in Colorado with the Schwaz team. And so we actually passed off our Colorado operations to the Schwaz team as we went into close. And literally sort of the day after we closed, they were running our Colorado business. And now we're sort of on the flip side of that. We've announced a deal with Fluent. And so we were helping plan and integrate the Florida business. And that will have a very specific team. And then in California, we've also announced a joint venture with Glass House. And so I'll continue to run that in the future. And so I think the real key is finding those teams that know the business extremely well in their states, because every state is so different. California could not be more different than Florida, but we have exceptional local teams who can really focus on those markets.
So we're going to try to get a little granular, go up to down a little bit. And, I think in Missouri, as a founder of our company, you start out with 10 people and you go to 30 people and 80 people, 100 people, 300 people, and you're growing. And, goofballs like me aren't paying attention to everything. And you think you know things, but, you don't know as much as you think. And I was like, hey, we've got to build a team around these founders. We have to have people who can come in and they know the market, they know the customers, they're more ingrained with the day-to-day functioning, and that's when we hired Cardell. So I want you to explain and what you've done since you joined proper, what trends you've seen, how you've implemented some of the things from your previous work, and how it's worked in Missouri.
Yeah, for sure. Is this thing on? Perfect. I think the biggest opportunity for us in Missouri initially was just understanding our customer. So when I first got there, I think it was a very, I'd say like a very discombobulated inventory approach, right? You kind of buy what everyone else has, and there's really no clear market leader in retail. What we were able to do is just listen to our customers. A lot of surveys, definitely changing our procurement model, moving away from some of the more like reciprocal buys that kind of plagued the market at the time, and moving towards more of a customer demand focused business model. Got to give a lot of credit to Chris in particular. Delivery was something that was, I think we were maybe at 250 deliveries a month when I first started, and just kind of sharing best practices between companies showed us, hey, maybe there is a playbook out there. We don't have to go through 2-3 years of trial and error to figure out what works, waste a ton of money, waste a ton of human capital. And now we're at a point a year later where we're over 1,800 deliveries a month. So just an example of shared practices, and again, listening to our customers' feedback to make sure we drive retail in a positive direction.
When you say look at customers, so when you're looking at customers for the audience, what does that mean?
I think it's not just, and I think I told you this really early on. It's customers speak a lot with their dollar. And they like to be heard. I don't know. I'm a big Bezos guy. And Amazon is a really good example of a company who prioritizes the customer first and lets the customers take them to where they want to go. So we've implemented a lot of that ourselves, carve out different demographics of people, look at the product trends in the market, see what's moving in other markets to hopefully inform our customers before they know they want something. But yeah, I mean, the customer in Missouri in particular is someone who wants to be heard, wants to be listened. A lot of times they came from the black market, so they want to make sure that, what makes cannabis special to them is still captured in the legal market. And yeah, that's what we've kind of been able to capture in Missouri.
One thing I love about the industry, I think from a macro perspective, it touches a wide audience. You've got people who are coming in who have major need, right? And from the medical background and pharmaceutical background, it's very real. And then you have your traditional CPG concept, right? And how you can differentiate from your peers. What does it feel like when you walk into a store? What do you want your customer to feel when they exit? And how do you have that connectivity between your employer, or your customer service representative, your bud tender, and the customer itself? And then I think the last piece is there are brands, right? There's an element where people like to consume something that they trust. And I think that's why the industry is kind of doing this. So, Chris, with your background, 25, 30, imagine trying to manage 30,000 deliveries a day and trying to kind of capture, like, what does the customer want? Do you see any trends that are happening in the space now that are either in parallel or different than your background?
Yeah, so we had to compete against DoorDash and Uber Eats. DoorDash, if you guys know, backed by Sequoia, super high-level operators. And so we learned very quickly that we had to track our customers in numerous different ways. And we've taken that experience to cannabis. So we track in Utah our customers. I think there's 147 different attributes by customer per customer. So what I've seen, in Michigan, for example, people send out these deal sheets, and it's like the same deal sheet goes to all their customer base. Well, that really doesn't speak to the customer. You have to segment and slice and dice your customers and really speak to that customer. I learned that from food delivery. Not everyone wanted Chick-fil-A. A lot of people did wanted that delivered. Some people wanted Chipotle. And so we wouldn't take a Chick-fil-A ad to promote delivery to someone who wanted Chipotle. And so this is kind of baseline stuff that happens in retail, but there's still opportunities in this industry, frankly. I don't think people are paying that close of attention to their customers. They've opened up a store, they have inventory, and they sell inventory. And so I think there's a trend plus an opportunity there. I think the other thing that comes to mind is just the focus on digital. A lot of stores just kind of open up their physical retail presence, and they kind of rely on that, and it's top of mind every day. And they kind of do some stuff on the digital side, but there's really an opportunity in this industry to really focus on digital. Obviously, credit card processing would tremendously help that. But I think those are some trends plus some opportunities.
So, Vireo, like in less than a year, Chris and I closed our deal in June of last year. And, we were a 3-state operator, and now we're in 10 states. And, some of you have probably followed the headlines, and, we've got a great leadership team that's, super focused on that. And we saw an opportunity in that space. But a big thesis around, what we're trying to strive for is what are the best practices? How do you implement strategically without kind of taking away, that local culture? Cory, can you talk to that?
Yeah, I think one of the unique things Cardell talked about delivery in Missouri. Eaze is doing 60,000 deliveries a month in California. Our Florida business does more than 50% of our orders are pickup or order ahead. Definitely digital best practices is one of the things that translates best, as well as marketing. And so I think that that's one of the things where we're really leaning in. Cannabis in general has been, very restricted on, ways to run ads, places to run ads. And so focusing on email, SMS, MMS segmentation is definitely like a core, just ground level requirement in order to actually scale and grow. And so that's an area that does translate across states, but there are things that the Wholesome business in Utah does that we weren't necessarily doing, and vice versa. And so I think those translate so well cross state. Like those are the areas where you really can actually have like global framework that gets applied locally. And so I think that's one of the exciting things is actually just having an operator to call and be like, hey, Chris, like we actually just hop on a Zoom and chat through specific issues if it's about meta ads or otherwise.
Well, yeah, and I can speak to that as well because we had an issue with merchandising, and I was like, well, those guys over at Schwaz came from Albertsons. They probably know something about merchandising. So sure enough, I called Colin. He sent me his playbook, and I'm like, wow, we have a lot to learn on that side of the business. And so that's what we're trying to find every day. And there's opportunities every day to kind of find the best practices that maybe improve your business in Utah or improve your business in Colorado and vice versa, in California and Missouri. We're talking with his CS team, for example. They have a much more scaled CS effort, and we have a CS effort in operation in Utah, and it could probably be more optimized if we just combine forces. And they're way out front of us in terms of number
Can
of
you,
calls.
for the audience, explain what CS
Oh,
is?
sorry,
please?
customer service. So when you scale a digital business, in Wholesome Co., 94% of our sales are online by design. You have a lot of people calling and texting, and we're using AI, chatting, and so we haven't scaled as far as they have in their customer service, and so now we're looking to kind of combine efforts there. So there's the opportunities. A comp that really kind of comes to mind, if you guys are familiar with, there's a company called Constellation Software out of Toronto. They started in 95, I think, or 96. Their whole thesis was buy vertical software companies, not horizontal software companies. Vertical software companies are deep in one industry. I think they acquire like 500-600 companies. And if you read about their thesis, it's very similar to the thesis that we're talking about with Vireo.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so to that point, I think that one of the things John Mazarakis, our CEO, has said very publicly is that we really want to be $100 million plus, very, very retail focused in each market, and I think that is just like a very clear, very bright line for us. And so I think whenever you see us sort of doing specific acquisitions, it's really with that sort of like North Star in mind. There's a lot of cannabis is very, very deconsolidated. You look at a market like California. The biggest operators, have 60 stores, but there's more. That's only call it 6% market share by store count. So there's a lot of room for operations to consolidate in each of these markets. And I think that's what's exciting is to be sort of at the front end of that and be sort of really aggressive on that front.
So at Proper, you've reached this kind of plateau, and you can only go so big in the market. And, we were confronted with a situation like, oh, what do we do? Like, do we leverage our team and try to jump into Ohio or Kentucky, or think that we can go out to California and, going to raise capital? And, are you going to assume that your team can function at the same level there? You have to go into that market, learn the regulatory body and the people. Like, it's very difficult. And I think like when Chris and I met, we realized like, man, we're kind of stuck with the same. Is that me? Oh my gosh, sorry. You're kind of stuck, and companies don't want to get stuck, right? Like, especially when you're kind of entrepreneurial and you're used to like doing things and like having fun. Like I always say, like, as long as you're having fun, you just keep going, right? And I think like the group of people we pulled together kind of think that way. How do we leverage the skill set, behind the body of the team, and allow us to kind of utilize our strengths. And Cardell, you're an example of that. And I think, when we were talking earlier this morning, by the way, he got in at 4 a.m. So he went to the hockey game last night in Las Vegas. So
Did not end well.
depends on who you had. What are some of the trends, or since we kind of closed on our transactions? How have you been able to capture like maybe some of the best practices or things that are working in other markets that you've kind of brought into the Missouri front?
My favorite thing has been the open line of communication across markets. So being able to pick up the phone, to Chris's point, and call someone who's been through what you're wondering about has been instrumental. I think trend-wise, product trends have probably been the most telling. I think like most things tend to move from west to east coast. So California, Colorado are typically indicator markets for what products are next in Missouri. So, I mean, the biggest example most recently was 2-gram vape cartridges. So 2-gram vapes that were kind of a foreign concept in Missouri for a long time. We looked at what was happening in California and Colorado, and we knew it was inevitable. So we were able to get on with vendors, talk about the inevitability of it, and seal some exclusives down so that we cornered that 2-gram market first. So that's something we wouldn't have been able to do without access to information from other markets that our partners and other channels have allowed us to see into.
The can you guys talk about kind of data? I mean, you guys, think that way, and just what you look at, why do you look at it, and how we're utilizing kind of the support across the portfolio to kind of jump in and analyze it more.
Yeah, so that was kind of one of the kind of first things that we obviously started working on even before I think we closed, was how do we have access to data, real-time access to data across markets. I index a little bit more on the demand side. That's more my expertise. And so I really focus on customer lifetime value, customer retention, customer acquisition costs, trying to figure out how do you create a stickier funnel. When something's kind of trending down in that area, I immediately go to things like the foundational things, like do you have the right merchandise? Is it priced right? Is your customer experience good? Is it fast? Is it convenient? So I tend to open my dashboard up and look at those metrics more often than not. And again, we index Wholesome Co. to be very, very customer first. We built our supply business second. So we started our demand business for the first 2 years. We had a cultivation license, we had a processing manufacturing license. We bought everything in the market that was already for sale. So 100% of our sell-through was third-party products. We learned from that. We watched customers, what they would buy, what they didn't buy again. And we decided to right-size our supply operation based on that information, that data for 2 years.
We sort of have two ends of the barbell. California, we're basically all third-party products, and then Florida, it's all first-party products. And so that sort of allowed us to attack the data question from two different sides. In California, very e-com centric. We had built our own sort of full tech stack, and as Chris said, one of the first things we did when we joined the Vireo platform was like literally on day 2. They had full access to all of our data warehouses, which meant that all of leadership could be looking at it, literally from day 1, which was sort of very impressive, and was what I think helps make the engine work. On the flip side, in Florida, we really view the problem as so much of a supply-based issue. And so one of the unique things we do have is we have a full seed to sale ERP that we're heavily reliant on, which means that we can look for all of our 41 stores and soon to be 73 stores, making sure that we're actually producing the exact right quantities and amount by subcategory, to make sure that you're actually keeping the stores supplied with the right product. And markets do change. It's nice to have sort of the leading indicators, as Cardell said, from sort of the West Coast, where you can see some of the early product trends. We effectively don't make anything that's under a full gram vape anymore. You can look at the AIO trends and see how strong AIOs were coming on, and AIOs have surpassed full gram universal cards in California, for example. And so you can sort of see those early trends, and then when you're a fully first party producer, you can make sure that you're sort of getting ahead of those trends. So it's nice to have sort of the coast to coast balance of, hey, we actually have to produce all these products, but we have some of the best innovation coming out of the West Coast and legacy markets.
Sorry, I think the other thing that I pay very close attention to is market share and the movement in market share as often as you can get it. Like in Utah, we have access to a state database that reports on market share every month. And when it comes out, like call it, July 3rd, it's the first thing I want to look at. And really what I'm looking at is like, not so much like, are we continuously going up? Obviously that's the goal, but when we go up or when we go down, why? And so we get into like on a per geographic, per zip code basis, to understand where do we gain and lose customers. And so to me, that you learn a lot by asking why, especially when it comes to market share, because that's the ultimate kind of litmus test on how you're competing against your peers in the market.
Yeah, I'm gonna think about proper, and I think this is a model that a lot of folks follow, not just in Missouri but nationwide, is a huge emphasis on first party products. You end up stretching past your own supply capabilities at a certain point. And while you're making better margins, you're not necessarily, to the point that all three of us have made today, listening to your consumer. So I think the biggest thing about data, it helped us find the white space and where we weren't. And instead of trying to fill that white space with a first party option immediately, we could fill it with a third party, analyze the data, see if it was worth investing in for our own supply. And we've got 3 new innovative products that came as a direct result of market analytics and success that third parties have had on our menus that are in product lines that we didn't even contemplate creating at first. So that's been big for us too in Missouri. But I know a lot of folks in here are first folks, and I think the third party data really fuels where first party should go after. Demand really leading supply is kind of the core concept that we've got.
You look at Florida, and it's a first party state. So you're vertically integrated, and what you sell at the retail level is what you produce at the cultivation and manufacturing facilities. So you have to win over your customer by having that really good experience. And if the products aren't good, then they're going to go somewhere else. Or if the customer service is not up to par, they may not even get to the products. I always thought, hey man, we got really good brands, right? And you kind of have like this ego, like, oh man, this is cool. Like we do this well. But like, how many SKUs do we carry at our stores now?
400 to 500, up from about 300 before.
And Cory, I mean, from a California perspective,
We're 900 to 1100 on e-com and 600 to 800 in retail.
so you think about like the backlog of how that's supported, how many vendors and procurement, and how many salespeople you have to deal with, and what are your par levels that you want to keep on inventory at the store. Like it's a lot to manage, right? I think there is an easy thesis like, hey, let's create this procurement up top. Let's have Tyson tell us what we should do, right? But to have however many here, however many there, can you walk us through kind of how you manage it and why we think kind of that local approach is more functional and efficient?
I think the biggest thing locally is vendors are typically MSOs and have at least supply lines. Think about like the Wilds of the world who are in most states in the U.S. They obviously know what's coming and are able to innovate a little bit quicker. But something we implemented really early on, maybe about 2 years ago, were very comprehensive vendor reviews. So when we meet with vendors, we're pretty transparent with our data and show them, hey, we'll onboard your brand, we'll set a 21-day period for evaluation, we'll measure how that compares to the first order that we did, and then we'll readjust pars effectively. So if someone overperforms and punches above their weight, and we measure that by percent of inventory versus percent of sales, then that's a signal to buy more of it. If it's the opposite, then it's a signal to cut it down. And I tell my procurement guys this all the time. I almost want vendors to tell us to make a bad business decision because we're so transparent with the data. And in my experience, no one's done that considering the amount of data we show them and the support that we give the brands that win.
You were talking earlier about like consignment and some of the trends you see in there, and you were kind of comparing other industries and how many SKUs they handle and they take. Can you guys kind of talk to that about how you're following the landscape of other industries and kind of what it means locally to us?
Yeah, it was, just one interesting trend in California that we've seen is one of the largest retail chains is now moving to a fully consignment model on their inventory, which is just an interesting, unique shift in the market. We've been net 60 for years with brands, and it's allowed us to have great relationships. We're a consistent payer. That's been a long California problem. But the move to consignment is definitely something that is an interesting trend to watch. Basically, they'll take product, they don't sell it within 90 days, and they're either going to give it back to the vendors or just sell through. But yeah, that's an interesting, just sort of new trend that is emerging in California that will be one to watch.
Yeah, I index a little bit more to like just keep cutting SKUs. We have about 600. It's too many. There's sales teams, they cut like the bottom 10% every year. And what I see, one of the problems I see in the industry is that people just keep stacking SKUs, and like you get to 900, you get to 1,000. You said in California some stores are carrying 2,000. I just think it's way too many. And I look at other industries out there. So Costco, I think they carry like around 3,000 or 3,500 SKUs, whereas Walmart carries I think 105 or 110,000 SKUs. I love the Costco model. Like that's the model I hopefully grow up and be as a cannabis operator. So I'm always kind of telling our guys in Utah, like, we got to cut SKUs, we got to cut SKUs. And so ultimately what Cardell said is what matters, is that if you give the SKUs a chance to sell and they overperform, then obviously those SKUs are the ones that are meant to be there. But at the same time, every time you bring in new SKUs, you should look to ask yourself, what SKUs can we cut? I look at like the Michigan market. Some of these stores have way too many SKUs, and they need it's time too. You're tying up your balance sheet in cash, right? But you're also spending a lot of time managing, dozens and dozens of vendors, and so I'm always in big favor of cutting SKUs.
So we got a couple of minutes here, but I think to kind of say farewell, I think I was talking with Elliot, and if you look at this headline under the hood of an industry giant, like we're pretty benign people, we're pretty normal, he made up that headline, right? And I think you look at a company that grows quickly, and you're like, holy shit, like what are these guys doing? We gotta figure these things out, right? It's not that complicated, right? And I think that when you have good businesses, they're typically led by good people. Some people say, hey, processes first. I always say people first, because people kind of solve the processes. Contrary to maybe public view, this is the team, right? It was super purposeful, right? Not that our peers are not great companies. There's a lot of great companies, and companies have to kind of figure out their path and what works with them. And I think you can kind of see that, these are guys that have led big organizations, thousands of people. I'd like to just kind of end with a little bit of a charge ahead of hey, how do you see the industry going, and how kind of our platform kind of fits into that vision of the market itself. So closing thoughts.
Yeah, I think on the macro cross market, you're going to see more consolidation happening. I just think that's going to be a trend of the here now and in the future, in the near future. With that said, I wake up every day focused on how can we get better in Utah, and so that's my true north, and that's Cory's true north in California and Florida. It's Cardell's true north in Missouri, and so that's not going to change. What's going to change is the macro market. I think there's going to be more consolidation just happening in general.
Yeah, and then I think within each market, I think you're just going to have, a little bit of the same process repeating itself, which is, really integrating these companies, but that falls on the local operators to do. We have exceptional management teams in every state, and so I think the fun thing for me is, we closed our Eaze transaction on April 1st. By April 16th, we'd announced a joint venture with Glasshouse. A month later, we'd announced a deal with Fluent, and so I think that. And that sort of fell on our team to be handling California and handling Florida, and it's been a ton of fun to tackle those projects. So I think as executive, as CEO of a company that was doing 140 million in revenue at 1,000+ employees, it's super exciting. This is what we love to do. This is what our team loves to do. So it's really, really thrilling to be able to sort of tackle the next set of problems, and I imagine that will be true across every state.
Yeah, I agree with all the points. And to Chris's point about the bottoms-up approach to building, I think the thing I'm most excited for is continuing to refine processes at the local level that translate to the macro level. So, continuing to give my leaders a chance to grow and participate in the growth of not just Missouri, but the company at large if the opportunity presents itself.
Well, this is the think tank. And hopefully you guys have come away with some interesting thoughts and opinions of your own. And we'll be in the hallway if you guys have questions. Again, contrary to the headline, we're pretty approachable. We're pretty excited about what we're doing. And, clearly the market, I think, sees that we're trying to do things differently. And, appreciate your guys' time this morning. Have a great conference, and we'll talk to you soon.